March 9th, 2026, 0347 local time, Malacca Strait. A commercial tanker captain aboard the MV Pacific Venture notices something unusual on his radar. 3 warships, moving in tight formation, heading northwest at a speed that makes no sense for a routine transit. He counts the blips, estimates the speed, radios his company operations center in Singapore. His exact words: "There's a U.S. Navy formation blowing through the strait like someone lit a fire under them." He wasn't wrong. The 3 ships were USS Tripoli, USS Portland, and USS John P. Murtha. Together, they form the Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group. Embarked aboard, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. 2,200 Marines, their aircraft, their weapons, and a very specific set of skills that someone in Tampa, Florida, needed desperately. CENTCOM had issued the order 41 hours earlier. The message was short. The implications were not. Proceed Persian Gulf. Best sustainable speed. Report arrival estimate upon receipt. Best sustainable speed. In naval terminology, that phrase carries weight. It means burn fuel at a rate that would make any logistics officer wince. It means push the engineering plants to their practical limits. It means sleep becomes optional, maintenance becomes continuous, and the ships arrive with tanks running toward empty. The Tripoli ARG was 4,200 nautical miles from the Strait of Hormuz, at best sustainable speed, roughly 22 knots sustained. That transit would take approximately 8 days. CENTCOM wanted them there in 5. That meant flank speed, 27 knots. For an amphibious assault ship and 2 landing platform docks, that is punishing. The turbines scream. Fuel consumption nearly doubles. The hulls shudder with the strain. And every sailor aboard knew the same thing. You don't push an ARG to flank speed across the Indian Ocean unless the situation on the other end has gone from bad to catastrophic. I'm your host at Navy Battlefront, where we break down the most critical naval operations shaping global power. Today, we're reconstructing the fastest ARG deployment since the opening days of the Iraq War. A 5-day sprint across 2 oceans that ended with Marines fast roping onto a suspect vessel in the Persian Gulf, less than 18 hours after arriving on station. This is the story of how the Tripoli ARG ran a gauntlet of logistics, exhaustion, and calculated risk to plug a gap that Fifth Fleet could not fill on its own. To understand why 3 ships were tearing across the Indian Ocean at 27 knots, you need to understand what had been happening in the Strait of Hormuz for the preceding 6 weeks. Beginning in late January 2026, commercial shipping traffic through Hormuz began reporting anomalies. Small cylindrical objects spotted floating near the traffic separation scheme. At first, these reports were dismissed. Debris, lost fishing equipment, containers that had fallen from cargo ships. Then, on February 3rd, the Maltese-flagged tanker Aegean Promise struck something 12 nautical miles southeast of Bandar Abbas. The explosion tore a 40-foot gash in her port hull below the waterline. She didn't sink. Double hull construction saved her, but she limped into Fujairah, leaking crude oil and taking on water. The U.S. Fifth Fleet dispatched mine countermeasure ships. What they found confirmed the worst-case scenario: mines, not old rusting, drifting relics from the 1980s tanker war. These were modern EM-52 rising mines, Chinese-designed, Iranian-manufactured, capable of sitting on the seabed and launching a rocket-propelled warhead upward into a ship's hull when triggered by acoustic or magnetic signature. Within 2 weeks, Fifth Fleet's mine hunters located and neutralized 14 mines in the eastern approach to Hormuz. Intelligence assessments indicated that at least 40 more had been laid, possibly many more, seeded by Iran's fleet of small wooden dhows that transit the strait daily by the hundreds and are virtually impossible to distinguish from legitimate fishing vessels. Commercial shipping began diverting. insurance premiums for Hormuz transits tripled overnight. By mid-February, daily oil tanker traffic through the strait had dropped by 31%. Global oil prices spiked past $118 per barrel. The mine threat was serious, but mines were only half the problem. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGC-N, had simultaneously increased its small boat activity to levels not seen since the 2019 crisis. Swarms of fast attack craft, armed with heavy machine guns and rocket launchers, were conducting aggressive approaches on commercial vessels, boarding attempts, warning shots. In at least 2 confirmed incidents, IRGC-N personnel physically boarded foreign-flagged tankers and detained their crews for hours before releasing them. Fifth Fleet had destroyers and cruisers in theater. Plenty of firepower. But destroyers are not designed for visit-board search and seizure operations against dozens of small vessels simultaneously. You cannot send a 60-man boarding team from an Arleigh Burke because it doesn't have one. A destroyer's crew fights the ship. They don't rappel onto dhows. What Fifth Fleet needed was Marines. Specifically, Marines trained and equipped for maritime interdiction operations at scale. Teams that could deploy from helicopters, fast rope onto vessel decks, clear compartments, secure evidence, and be back in the air moving to the next target within hours. The 31st MEU had exactly that capability. Their maritime raid force consisted of a reinforced rifle company trained specifically for VBSS operations. They had MV-22 Ospreys that could cover the distances involved. They had AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters that could provide overwatch and suppressive fire if a boarding went hostile. They were also 7,000 miles away, operating in the Philippine Sea. The order came on March 7th at 19:06 Zulu. Commander, U.S. Pacific Fleet forwarded CENTCOM's request with a single endorsement. Approved. Execute immediately. Aboard USS Tripoli, Captain Eric Delano read the message twice. Then he called his department heads to the Combat Information Center. The brief lasted 11 minutes. Delano laid it out clearly. They were heading to the Persian Gulf. They would transit at maximum sustainable speed. They would conduct underway replenishment en route, twice, coordinated with military Sealift Command oilers positioned along their track. They would arrive ready to conduct operations immediately. One of the engineering officers raised the obvious concern. Flank speed for 5 days would push the ship's gas turbines to their thermal limits. Maintenance intervals would be compressed. If a turbine failed mid-Indian Ocean, they'd lose speed, miss their window, and arrive too late to matter. Delano's response, according to sources familiar with the discussion, then don't let the turbines fail. By 2100 Zulu on March 7th, the Tripoli ARG had altered course. The 3 ships formed a line abreast formation, maximizing their radar coverage while minimizing their acoustic cross-section, and began accelerating. 22 knots, 24, 26. At 27 knots, USS Tripoli, a 45,000-ton America-class amphibious assault ship, creates a bow wave that can be felt aboard ships 2 miles away. Her 2 Rolls-Royce MT-30 gas turbines were producing over 70,000 shaft horsepower. Fuel consumption at that speed, approximately 10,000 gallons per hour. The Portland and Murtha, both San Antonio-class landing platform docks, strained to keep pace. Their 4 Colt peel stick diesel engines were designed for sustained operations at 15 to 18 knots. Pushing them to 27 meant running at 93% capacity, a margin that left almost no room for mechanical failure. The first problem materialized 14 hours into the transit. USS Portland reported a vibration anomaly in her number 3 diesel. The chief engineer traced it to a bearing in the reduction gearbox. Not failed, but showing elevated temperature readings. At the current speed, that bearing would degrade within 72 hours, possibly less. Captain Delano faced his first decision. Slow the entire formation to let Portland reduce strain on the affected engine, or maintain speed and accept the risk of a mechanical casualty mid-ocean. He chose a third option. Portland would shift propulsion load to her remaining 3 engines, accepting reduced redundancy, while the engineering team attempted a bearing inspection during the transit. This meant taking 1 engine offline for 6 hours while the ship maintained speed on 3. Possible, but it left zero margin if another engine developed problems. The repair team worked in the cramped, deafening engine room while the ship hammered through swells at 27 knots. The heat was oppressive, over 130 degrees Fahrenheit near the turbine casings. Sailors rotated in 30-minute shifts to avoid heat exhaustion. By hour 20 of the transit, the bearing had been inspected, re-greased, and the engine brought back online. Temperature readings stabilized. Portland's chief engineer reported the fix was holding, but the vibration had cost them something else: attention. While the engineering team focused on the bearing, a routine maintenance check on one of the ship's RHIBs, rigid-hulled inflatable boats essential for boarding operations, was delayed. That delay would have consequences later. The Tripoli ARG passed through the Malacca Strait on March 9th. That's when the commercial tanker captain spotted them. That's when open-source intelligence analysts began tracking the formation on satellite imagery and vessel tracking data. Within hours, the transit was public knowledge. Defense analysts on social media identified the ships, calculated their speed, and projected their destination. The strategic surprise of the deployment, if there ever was any, evaporated. This created a secondary problem. Iran now knew the ARG was coming. They had approximately 4 days to prepare. Declassified intelligence assessments indicate that within 12 hours of the Malacca transit being reported online, IRGCN units in Bandar Abbas began dispersing. Fast attack craft moved to secondary harbors along the Iranian coast. Mine-laying dhows, previously concentrated near Hormuz, scattered into commercial fishing grounds where they would be almost impossible to identify. The element of tactical surprise was gone. The 31st MEU would not be arriving to catch Iran off guard. They would be arriving to a theater where the adversary had prepared for their presence. Colonel David Rourke, commanding officer of the 31st MEU, held a planning session aboard Tripoli on March 10th. His intelligence officer presented the updated threat picture. Iran had likely repositioned its mine-laying assets. IRGCN fast boats had dispersed to at least 9 separate anchorages along the coast, and satellite imagery showed increased activity at Iran's Silkworm anti-ship missile battery sites overlooking the strait. Rourke's assessment was blunt. They weren't just conducting boarding operations anymore. They were entering a contested maritime environment where the threat could escalate from law enforcement to combat without warning. The MEU's VBSS teams began adjusting their loadouts. In addition to standard boarding equipment, breaching tools, flex cuffs, communication gear, they added body armor rated for rifle threats. Each team would carry an additional combat medic. Rules of engagement were reviewed, then reviewed again. March 11th, day 4 of the transit, the Indian Ocean. The first underway replenishment was scheduled with USNS Tippecanoe, a Henry J. Kaiser-class fleet replenishment oiler positioned 300 nautical miles southeast of Diego Garcia. The rendezvous window was tight. Tippecanoe had diverted from her own schedule to meet them, and any delay would cascade through Military Sealift Command's logistics chain across the entire Indo-Pacific. Underway replenishment at 27 knots is not standard procedure. Normal unrep speed is 12 to 16 knots. The closure rates, the tension on fuel lines, the station-keeping demands on the helmsman, everything becomes exponentially more dangerous at higher speeds. Delano ordered the formation to slow to 18 knots for the unrep. Even that was aggressive. The refueling took 4 hours, Tripoli took on 900,000 gallons of JP-5 aviation fuel and DFM marine diesel. Portland and Merthyr refueled in sequence, 4 hours at reduced speed. 63 nautical miles of distance lost compared to maintaining flank speed. Delano calculated the math in his head and ordered the formation back to 27 knots before Merthyr had fully disconnected her fueling rigs. The last fuel hose was retrieved under tension that nearly snapped the messenger line. No one was hurt, but the boatswain's mate, who caught the whipping line across his forearm, needed 8 stitches. The fatigue was building. 5 days at flank speed doesn't just stress machinery, it grinds down human beings. The constant vibration at 27 knots makes deep sleep nearly impossible. Sailors in racks near the hull reported feeling like they were sleeping on a jackhammer. The mess deck served food that slid off trays. Coffee became the most consumed substance aboard all 3 ships. Colonel Rourke ordered the MEU's Marines to maintain a training schedule despite the conditions. VBSS teams rehearsed boarding procedures in the well deck, timing their entries, practicing room-clearing techniques. But the ship's motion made realistic training difficult. 2 Marines sustained minor injuries during a fast rope exercise when a swell caused the practice platform to shift unexpectedly. The medical officer aboard Tripoli reported a 30% increase in sickbay visits during the transit, mostly minor injuries, motion sickness, and fatigue-related incidents. Nothing critical. But the cumulative toll was real. March 12th brought the second problem that no one anticipated. The ARG was transiting the central Indian Ocean, approximately 800 nautical miles southwest of the Maldives, when Tripoli's intelligence team intercepted a communication fragment suggesting that an Iranian Kilo-class submarine, hull number 901, identified as Iris Tariq, had departed Bandar Abbas and was heading southeast, toward the Arabian Sea, toward the ARG's projected track. The Kilo-class is a diesel-electric submarine, Russian-built, quiet when running on batteries, armed with Test 71 wire-guided torpedoes and capable of laying mines from its torpedo tubes. A single Kilo-class submarine cannot sink an amphibious assault ship easily, but it can damage one. A torpedo hit on Portland or Merthyr could mission-kill the ship, forcing the ARG to slow or divert, adding days to the transit. Tripoli did not carry a dedicated anti-submarine warfare capability. Her embarked aircraft, Ospreys and helicopters, were configured for the VBSS mission, not sub-hunting. The ARG had no submarine escort, no destroyers, no P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft overhead. They were, in anti-submarine terms, effectively blind and unprotected. Captain Delano requested ASW support from 5th Fleet. The response took 6 hours. A single P-8 Poseidon from VP-10, operating out of Diego Garcia, was diverted to provide 12 hours of coverage along the ARG's track. That was all that could be spared. Every other maritime patrol aircraft in the region was committed to the mine-hunting operation in Hormuz. 12 hours of coverage over a 60-hour transit window. The math was not encouraging. The P-8 arrived on station on March 13th, dropped a pattern of sonobuoys across the ARG's projected path, and began monitoring. For 8 hours, nothing. Then, at 14:23 local time, one of the sonobuoys detected a transient contact, a brief acoustic signature consistent with a submarine snorkeling. Bearing, southeast. Range, estimated 60 to 80 nautical miles from the ARG. The P-8 prosecuted the contact for 3 hours, dropped additional sonobuoys, deployed a lightweight torpedo in deterrent mode, not to attack, but to signal to the submarine that it had been detected. The contact disappeared. Whether the Tariq broke off its approach, changed course, or simply went deep and silent, the P-8 couldn't determine. The aircraft reached its fuel endurance limit and returned to Diego Garcia. The ARG was alone again. Delano altered the formation's course by 15 degrees north, adding approximately 40 nautical miles to their transit, but shifting away from the submarine's last known position. He also ordered all 3 ships to activate their hull-mounted sonar systems in passive mode and post additional lookouts trained in periscope detection. These were improvised measures. They were better than nothing. They were not much better than nothing. The submarine was not seen again during the transit. Whether it was ever actually targeting the ARG or simply transiting to its own patrol station remains unclear. After-action intelligence assessments were inconclusive, but for 36 hours, every sailor in the formation knew there might be a torpedo boat lurking beneath them, and that knowledge has a weight that doesn't show up in any logistics report. March 13th, the second underway replenishment, USNS Walter S. Deal, met them 400 nautical miles south of the Gulf of Oman. This one went cleaner. The seas were calmer. The crews had practiced the high-speed approach during the first unrep, and the entire evolution was completed in 3 hours. But Deal's supply officer reported a problem. The ARG had requested ammunition resupply, specifically .50 caliber rounds and 40mm grenades for the weapons mounted on the VBSS team's helicopter gunships. Deal didn't carry that ordnance. It was aboard a separate ammunition ship that was still 48 hours behind them. The 31st MEU would arrive in the Persian Gulf with enough ammunition for approximately 3 days of sustained boarding operations. After that, they would need resupply, or they would be conducting VBSS missions with undermanned weapons loads. Colonel Rourke received this news with visible frustration. According to officers present, he said, "We're sprinting across an ocean to do a job and arriving without enough bullets to do it for more than 72 hours." The logistics chain had been designed for a deliberate, planned deployment over weeks. The 5-day sprint had compressed that timeline beyond what the supply system could accommodate. March 14th, 0600 local, the Gulf of Oman. The Tripoli ARG cleared the mouth of the Gulf and entered 5th Fleet's area of operations. Ahead, the Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. On the northern shore, Iran. On the southern shore, Oman and the United Arab Emirates. The strait was not empty. 5th Fleet had 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Halsey and USS Steret, patrolling the traffic separation scheme. Above them, MQ-9 Reaper drones maintained continuous surveillance. Mine countermeasure vessels worked the eastern approaches, but the IRGCN was present too. 5th Fleet's common operational picture showed 11 Iranian fast attack craft operating in clusters of 2 and 3, shadowing commercial traffic. 2 Iranian frigates loitered near Bandar Abbas, and somewhere in the mix, those mine-laying dhows continued their work, indistinguishable from hundreds of legitimate fishing boats. Captain Delano reported the ARG's arrival to Commander 5th Fleet at 0730. The response was immediate. Proceed to operating station. Begin VBSS operations at earliest capability. Earliest capability. Not after your crews have rested. Not after you've topped off your fuel and ammunition. Now. The Tripoli ARG had been at flank speed for 5 days. The crews were exhausted. The Marines had been training in miserable conditions for nearly a week. One of Portland's diesels was still running hot from the bearing repair, and they had ammunition for 3 days. None of that mattered. The mission was waiting. Colonel Rourke launched the first VBSS operation 17 hours after the ARG entered the Gulf. March 14th, 2034, 1 local time. The target was a wooden dhow, approximately 60 feet in length, identified by MQ-9 surveillance as having departed the Iranian port of Jask 18 hours earlier. The dhow had been tracked making a series of stops in the shipping lane, pausing for 20 to 30 minutes at each location before moving on. The pattern was consistent with mine-laying. 2 MV-22 Ospreys lifted off from Tripoli's flight deck at 2320. Each carried an 8-man VBSS team, an AH-1Z, Viper provided armed overwatch, its forward-looking infrared camera painting the dhow in ghostly green light on the pilot's displays. The approach was textbook. The lead Osprey transitioned to hover 300 feet above the dhow. The VBSS team fast-roped onto the deck in 14 seconds. The second Osprey held position as a backup insertion platform. What happened next was not textbook. The dhow's crew, 7 men, did not resist. They raised their hands. They cooperated. But when the Marines began searching the vessel, they found the cargo hold had been recently washed with seawater. Deliberately. The hold smelled of chemicals, a sharp metallic odor that the team leader recognized from training. Explosive residue. The physical evidence had been scrubbed, but not thoroughly enough. An explosive ordnance disposal technician embedded with the team used a portable chemical detection kit, positive for RDX, the primary explosive compound used in EM-52 mine warheads. The dhow had been laying mines. The crew had been tipped off, likely by the widely reported news of the ARG's transit, and had dumped or deployed their remaining inventory before the Marines arrived. The 7 crew members were detained. The dhow was seized. But the mines that had been aboard were now somewhere in the Strait of Hormuz, sitting on the seabed, waiting for the acoustic signature of a tanker hull to trigger them. The first boarding was a tactical success and an intelligence partial failure. They had confirmed the mine-laying operation. They had captured a delivery platform. But the mines themselves were in the water. Over the next 48 hours, the 31st MEU conducted 11 additional boarding operations. 3 more dhows tested positive for explosive residue. 2 were clean. Legitimate fishing vessels caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their crews were released with apologies that did little to smooth the diplomatic friction already building between Washington and the Gulf states. The 6th boarding nearly went wrong. A dhow crew member, later identified as an IRGCN operative, made a sudden movement toward a compartment under the helm console. The Marine covering him fired a warning shot that punched through the deck planking inches from the man's feet. Inside the compartment, a satellite phone with numbers linked to IRGCN naval intelligence. No mines on that vessel. But the phone's call logs provided 5th Fleet intelligence with a network map of the mine-laying coordination system. Which harbors, which vessels, which timing. That single phone was, according to after-action assessments, more valuable than every mine the sweepers had neutralized. By March 16th, the 31st MEU had established a sustained interdiction pattern. 4 VBSS teams rotated in 12-hour shifts. Ospreys launched at all hours. The Vipers maintained a constant presence over the strait, their thermal cameras scanning the surface for dhows exhibiting suspicious behavior. The ammunition shortage hit on schedule. By the evening of March 16th, the .50 caliber reserves aboard the Vipers were at 40%. The 40mm grenade supply was lower. Rourke made the call to reduce the Viper's combat loadout per sortie, accepting reduced firepower in exchange for maintaining continuous coverage. The resupply ship finally arrived on March 17th. The ammunition was transferred by helicopter, a tedious, time-consuming process that pulled 2 Ospreys off the interdiction rotation for 6 hours. The cost of the 5-day sprint was now visible in every metric. Crew fatigue was manifesting in slower reaction times, increased minor errors, and a measurable drop in boarding team efficiency. Medical reported that sleep deprivation among the VBSS teams averaged 4 hours per night since arrival. Rourke implemented a mandatory rest cycle, pulling one team off rotation entirely for 24 hours. That decision reduced interdiction coverage by 25%. During that gap, surveillance drones tracked 2 suspect dhows entering the shipping lane. Neither could be boarded. Both exhibited the stop-and-pause pattern associated with mine laying. The estimated number of mines in the Strait of Hormuz, according to 5th Fleet assessments on March 17th, between 60 and 90. The number neutralized by mine countermeasure vessels, 23. The number of dhows interdicted by the 31st MEU that were confirmed mine layers, 4. The math was sobering. The Marines were making a difference, but they were not solving the problem. The strategic implications rippled outward. Iran's mine campaign had achieved its primary objective, disruption. Oil tanker traffic through Hormuz was down 38% from pre-crisis levels. Global oil prices had settled at $112 per barrel, high enough to punish Western economies, not high enough to trigger a military response beyond what was already underway. Tehran had calculated correctly. The mines were cheap, perhaps $50,000 each. The damage to the global economy was measured in billions per week. The asymmetry was devastating. Diplomatically, the Tripoli ARG's presence created its own complications. Oman, which controls the southern shore of the strait, privately expressed concern about the scale of U.S. military operations in waters it considers within its sphere of influence. The UAE, while publicly supportive, quietly asked Fifth Fleet to ensure that boarding operations did not interfere with commercial traffic entering the port of Fujairah. And Congress wanted answers. The Senate Armed Services Committee demanded a briefing on why the ARG had been deployed at such extreme speed and cost when, according to several members, the Navy should have had sufficient forces in theater already. The answer, that decades of fleet drawdowns had left Fifth Fleet without organic amphibious capability in the Persian Gulf, was not one the Navy was eager to deliver publicly. The Tripoli ARG's sprint was a symptom of a force structure problem that had been building for years. As of the time of this reconstruction, the 31st MEU continues operations in the Strait of Hormuz. The mine threat persists. IRGCN fast boat activity has decreased, but not stopped. And the Tripoli ARG's engineering department has submitted a maintenance assessment warning that 2 of Portland's 4 diesel engines require depot-level overhaul within 60 days. Damage directly attributable to the 5-day flank speed transit. The sprint saved time. It may have shortened the useful deployment life of 2 warships by months. One conclusion. The Tripoli ARG's deployment demonstrated that the United States Navy can still project power across vast distances with extraordinary speed when the situation demands it. That capability is not theoretical. It is real, and it was proven in 5 brutal days across the Indian Ocean. One consequence: the cost, in machinery wear, crew fatigue, ammunition shortages, and diplomatic friction, revealed how thin the margin has become. A Navy built for sustained global presence is now operating on sprint logistics, and every sprint extracts a price that compounds over time. One open question. Iran laid those mines with wooden dhows crewed by men who earn less in a year than a single SM-6 missile costs. The most powerful navy in the world responded by burning millions of dollars in fuel to rush an amphibious group across an ocean. If this calculus doesn't change, the next crisis won't require more ships. It will require a different strategy entirely. If you want to understand the operations shaping global naval power, subscribe to Navy Battlefront. Comment Hormuz if you think Fifth Fleet had the right plan, or if you think this deployment exposed a flaw the Navy can't afford to ignore. The Tripoli is still on station,